Welcome to the Schuler-Yocum Ancestry Part 2. This is the Schuler side, moving from the document trail to the DNA results. As soon as my results came in, I started getting questions from the Schuler side, not my mom's side. It was obvious the Schuler side was problematic. One of the contacts was from a sweet young man looking for his biological father. We matched so much DNA, but my brothers and I were too young to be his parent. This mystery will lead me to the federal prison system, not where you want your DNA to lead. So my mother and father married in February 1964 after a whirlwind romance. My father was 29 and my mom was a widow and wanted children at 25 years old. I knew my father was not an angel, but I also knew he would never abandon a child. I now believe he may have had an idea, but he couldn't prove my half-brother was his without DNA. With DNA, we know my father had a son in 1963. That son is currently in prison and will be held in a center specific for the mentally ill. I have a nephew and a niece that I never met. Unraveling the mystery took the DNA evidence, the paper trail, and the stories I was told by my father. My half-brother was born in September of 1963, but my father's discharge from the Army was in March of 63. We confirmed my half-brother was a full-term baby. So how could my father be his father? Then I remembered a story he had said about getting his sergeant drunk and signing his early release papers. And he was on a boat before his sergeant even realized, or something like that. So here, my father was actually back in the area in December of 1962 to attend a New Year's Eve party. His girlfriend Connie's best friend was also at that party, and that best friend was my half-brother's mom, confirming the DNA results. By this time, my son had already received a diagnosis, and my family had dealt with several hospitalizations for my twin brother. I also have a brother that ignores our pleas to get help because, maybe he is God. If I would just mention all the things that I've heard throughout my life that I thought was normal, it's unbelievable now. But I sent my DNA off. Well, I sent our DNA off to sequencing.com to confirm schizophrenia. I know that I specifically am a carrier, and this is passed from one parent to their child at a 50-50 rate. Not good statistics. I'm sharing my story to move the needle from stigma to hope. I know I'm not alone, and we need help. This country is not helping those with this condition. May is Mental Health Awareness, and I want people to be aware of what schizophrenia does to families and how it makes your lives so challenging. The exact prevalence of schizophrenia is difficult to measure, but estimates range from 0.25% to 0.64% of U.S. adults. That's not a lot, but it's enough. This is a complex, long-term medical illness. Schizophrenia is a serious mental health illness that interferes with a person's ability to think clearly, manage emotions, make decisions, and relate to others. It is a complex, long-term medical illness. Although schizophrenia can occur at any age, the average age of onset tends to be in the late teens to early 20s for men and the late 20s to early 30s for women. It is uncommon for schizophrenia to be diagnosed in a person younger than 12 or older than 40. It is possible to live well with schizophrenia. Schizophrenia is a mental health condition that affects everything from how you think to how you feel and behave, but that doesn't mean it has to control your life. NAMI and John Hopkins are great resources for schizophrenia. NAMI is the National Alliance on Mental Illness. Medical power of attorney should be used when possible, because when they're adults, they can do whatever they want, and you have no rights in this country today. 811 is a step in the right direction for our country, but much more should be done. There is a mother in California whose paranoid schizophrenic son went off the grid over 2 years ago, and because he's an adult, parents are forced to wait for a kind intervention or some angel to save their child. You can't ask for help to go look or search for somebody with a mental illness. Like if somebody had cancer out in the woods, you'd go get them and help them. Now that we have genetics to confirm a diagnosis, we need to keep our schizophrenics safe. While their rights should never be violated, they need to be med compliant to raise children. I feel strongly about this because I was raised in a household with somebody that wasn't medicated. I do have one brother who does not have schizophrenia, and we endured a very traumatic childhood. I now second guess everything I thought I knew. I did not have a good relationship with my father as a child. I did as an adult. I loved him very much. But as a child, I knew my father was a lot of fun, but he was like worse than us kids. I clung to my mother. I cried when I found out my birth certificate that had shown my father was really my father. It was just upsetting. He didn't make any sense to me. I mean, I love my father very dearly, and he was a wonderful man. However, he had behaviors and actions that did not always make sense and left me very confused. I didn't see my pappy for 5 years when I was in grade school. Still upsetting to this day. When he had been a big part of my life. He lived on our property until we moved. I believe now that my father abruptly cut his father out for all those years at my expense. My son is now doing the same thing to his son. It's very sad. I'm not sharing this information to embarrass my family, but I want to break the silence. People should know what we have to go through and endure, and what letting people with schizophrenia untreated does, or get them misdiagnosed, or not getting the right attention, or not, we don't have enough help or the right doctors, or doctors doing the right thing. They care about the money and only the money, and you just can't find the right help. I can document schizophrenia in my family back to into the 1800s and even further actually. But this is a great example of the documentation to show that schizophrenia has been in my DNA for over 200 years. Jacob was a brilliant Schuler that eventually lost everything and ended up in the poorhouse because there were no treatments in 1823. Jacob's siblings had to go to Washington, D.C. to retrieve their brother who thought he was involved in a disagreement with the president. 200 years ago, 200 years later, my twin brother went to the Philippines over politics. Still happening. My family has been through enough. Been hundreds of years. I mean, his obituary is basically making fun of him and calling, the death of a senator because he thought he was the senator from Nebraska. He would walk around and tell people that. In October, it tells the story about how he boarded a train for Washington, D.C., and how he got money to pay his fare. Nobody even knows. But once he was there, he insisted he was president of the United States and was locked up as a crank. They soon discovered he was harmless, and he was sent to an asylum. During the summer, he became sane and begged so hard to be sent home that they shipped him back to Allentown. He arrived in August. His mind became unbalanced again shortly afterwards, and he was taken to the poorhouse in August before he died. My brother begged to come home from the Philippines after his accident, and we didn't know he was bleeding internally, and he died. The same story. It's 200 years later. Enough's enough. We need help. People with families with schizophrenia should be identified and helped. So I thought I'd share, you know you're in a schizophrenic family when. I have two aunts that I never met. I have seven cousins I never met. I have a cousin who calls me twice a year to tell me she has terminal cancer, and she doesn't. Five of my grandparents, 14 grandchildren died in Five of my grandparents' 14 grandchildren died in middle age. It's a ridiculous percentage. Two or more of the great grandchildren died in their 30s. Very sad. The family is estranged and awkward due to false accusations and stories. Can my generation put an end to the tragedy and heartbreak? What can we do? How can we help other families? Can't we find schizophrenic families out there and give them the help they need? The next part will be on to the next generations. Thank you.